Welcome back to the No Gray Areas podcast. I'm your host, Patrick McCalla, and today my co-host, Brandon Lopez, and I have an exclusive episode in store for you. As 2024 draws to a close, we're diving into some of the year's most complex and controversial topics. Let's get started. Brandon Lopez, welcome back to you've been on here quite a few times. You've co-hosted, you've actually interviewed me. But here we are finishing up 2024, which is crazy. We're almost a quarter of the way through another century, which is amazing. But we want to talk about some of the key events, the current events that happened this last year, and really tie it into the core of this podcast, which is the power and complexity of human choice, that we make our choices and eventually our choices make us. So let's unpack, just briefly, some key things like the election. We're actually recording this the day before the election is going to happen. And this is actually, that episode dropped a month or so later. But we want to talk about the election. We want to talk about the hurricanes. That was a huge thing. A lot of people, fellow Americans, lost their lives, lost their whole livelihood, lost loved animals, lost loved ones. So we want to talk about that. The conflict in Israel, in the Middle East, massive. And for some of our audience, I don't know if they know the connection that we all have with that goes back over 4,000 years. We'll talk about that. AI. AI is a huge one. It is completely changing how work is going to be done now and in the future. And maybe even some other really difficult things if we have time. But let's jump into it right away with the election. All right, the election is happening tomorrow. Let's start with an easy one. The election is happening tomorrow. You and I know, we are hearing the polarity with the issues is, I'm not going to say as strong as it's ever been in our country, because if you believe that, you haven't read Civil War history. But it
feels heavy right now.
Yes, it's up there. It's up there. And so, I'm hearing both sides with a lot of fear. And a lot of people saying, man, if this happens, I got to leave this country, or it's not gonna work. So how do we handle that? How do we navigate that? We want to talk through that a little bit. So your thoughts really quickly, and then I'll share some of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that some paranoia is okay. I think it's good to try to be prepared for whatever you think is going to happen. Sure. I think that's okay, and I think that's good. But I do especially since we live in a form of government that we actually get to have a say in that. Exactly.
Like most of human history, most people, you don't get to choose or decide or have any a way of deciding who is going to be in your leadership. So you're saying some of that is good because it's preparing us in how we decide who we're going to vote for.
Exactly. Yeah. And especially right now with how polarizing everything is and how different policies and ideologies are in both parties, it's pretty inherent for people to want to be probably a little bit more paranoid. Yeah. And I think that there is, in any kind of culture, in any stage of life, you got to be paranoid to the extent to survive, right? Yeah. Not saying that we're going to be in a survival mode by any means like that. But I do think that at the same time, on the same side of the token, is that a lot of people become false prophets over their own life and then, of course, everybody else. And so they start to predict like, oh, this is going to happen if so-and-so gets elected. This is what's going to happen if this happens. And so we have a lot of people saying a lot of different things, whether it be Trump or Kamala, of what they're predicting life is going to look like for America, and we don't know. And I think what we really want to dive into specifically on this topic is, especially for people of faith, for the Christian, is where do we have hope and where do we have faith in, and how is that different than just a regular civilian in any kind of form of government?
It's a great point about the false prophecy thing because, and I find myself doing it. I really do think in my lifetime, this election maybe, I'm going to say maybe based on what you just said, because I don't want to be a false prophet, but maybe has some of the most important repercussions on what could happen.
Paranoia part of it, which is appropriate too.
Yeah. But there's a maybe there. We don't know. We don't know. I mean, if you back up, you guys, you're too young, and some of our listeners too young for this, but I can remember back with Bill Clinton, that one, and it was the same kind of paranoia I was hearing. And I remember the next day, I was actually in Bible college at the time, after he got elected, and there was a lot of people in that at that time that were definitely thinking like, okay, if he becomes president, this is going to be blah, 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 the world's going to end, all this stuff. But I remember the professor just started the class by saying, hey, a quick question for you all. Who's still on the throne today? And that was such an appropriate question because it adjusted our thinking. And in fact, when I was driving here today to do this podcast, I pulled over the side of the road and wrote this down because I thought of this little quote. If our hope is in who governs us, we're going to have some issues. Mm-hmm. But if our hope is in the King of all kings and Lord of all lords, who is always on his throne, then we're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Whatever, again, we're recording this day before election, whatever happens tomorrow, what we know is God's still on his throne. And God's not going to, he won't wake up tomorrow because he never sleeps, but he's not going to go tomorrow, oh my goodness, I didn't see this coming. Yeah. What do I do? So that's really our hope as we navigate this. And I think it's a good reminder for all of us to not live in fear. We see that over 360 times. The Bible says, fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not. Well, why? Because of who's on the throne. So we can look at this, we can do our what I think is our responsibility as citizens, but we can also, before we even know what's going to happen, and by the time this episode drops, we will already know who was elected, we can also sit back and go, I can rest in the fact that it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. God's still on his throne.
And I think just take responsibility and ownership of your own life too.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who wins, is what really matters, honestly, is what you're doing in your own house.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like what we talk about is often like, what do you have dominion over, right?
Yes.
And what do you have actually leadership in? And oftentimes when we invite other things in, we open ourselves to other things, or we just give ownership away to other things, then we become subject, we become reliant and dependent on those things. We're no longer self-reliant or independent. And so, so when it comes to elections, we can get frantic, we can do all that, but if we aren't doing our part as far as what are we going to be like in our home, what are we going to be like in our work, our families, our community, whatever that looks like, if you're not doing your part of just being whatever leadership that's pulled out of you to be able to fulfill in those areas, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
Great point. And again, you know this, but one of my things that I'm holding on to for the last couple of months has been I'm not giving away my peace. Mm-hmm. Yeah. God has promised that he's given me a peace that the world cannot understand, a peace that the world cannot give because it's not based on circumstances. It's not based on us being in a time of peace. It's not based on us having the right person as our governing leader. It's not based on me having a job or not having a job. It's a peace that no one can understand and only God can give us. I've been given that. You've been given that. Any of our listeners who are followers of God have been given that. And if you don't have it, it's because you chose to give it away. Mm-hmm. So this, like an election, is an example where so often we choose to give away our peace because we start living in fear. We start, as you mentioned, giving false prophecies, saying, well, this is what's going to happen. We don't even know for sure what's going to happen. But what we can control, what we can have within that peace is what God has put in dominion for me. Mm-hmm. I can choose. I can't control who's going to be president. I can do my part, vote. Yeah. But then outside of that, it's out of my control. What can I control? Being a good husband, being a good father, being a good poppy, granddad, being a loving, caring person to those that I run into, fighting for injustices when I can or what I have the power over to do. Those things are the things that we need to be doing. Yeah, great point. Let's jump into the next one. A current event that happened this year that was heart-wrenching if people really looked into it and watched it was the hurricanes. Mm-hmm. And a couple of directions I want to take this. One of them is just what should our response be to human suffering? And then secondly, it's tied to the environment a little bit. That is very controversial because some people are like, no, it's not. And other people are like, absolutely it is. And again, I'll jump into this one. We'll come back to the one where we're talking about what should our response be to human suffering. Mm-hmm. I do believe that we don't know for sure. We can't know for sure how science might be twisted when it comes to environment. But what I do know is the beginning of the narrative, the biblical worldview narrative, is God created humans, the pinnacle of his creation, and he said, I'm putting you in dominion over this earth. So if there's anybody on this planet that should care about environmental issues, it should be Jesus followers. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because it's gotten so political, we're not at the point of the spear on it. We're dragging behind. Not to say that, again, there's not environmental issues have been made very, very political, and there's been a lot of lies on it. But whatever the case, I do think that as Jesus followers, we should deeply, deeply care about our environment, and we should be at the point of the spear and saying, we got to take care of this. Because God, in the very first chapters, said, you take care of this. But let's jump into the human suffering part. What is our role as we navigate the power and complexity of human choice, that we make our choices on human suffering?
I think for one,
Through a simple question.
yeah, very simple question, and it's perfect because I actually have the answer for this.
Oh, good.
So we're gonna solve all our problems.
Good.
Yeah, just do better.
Yeah.
No, I think that for one, I think that human suffering or suffrage is honestly like a baseline human experience. So I think that anytime that
Meaning everyone has
it. Everyone experiences stress. Everybody experiences anxiety. Everybody experiences suffering. We might be in seasons of good times, right? But oftentimes we feel like that we're owed and we have the right to happiness and a thriving life, and that's just not what reality tells us.
Okay, I gotta jump in here though, and because I don't want the audience to miss what you just said. We do, I think, especially our Western mindset, think we're owed these things. So, and I've often said this, deep within your subconscious, you start thinking, if I live a good life, I should get a good life. I bought into that for a lot. I didn't even realize I was buying into that. And then when bad things started happening to me, I was like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But your point is, if you're a human being, suffering is going to be part of that.
Yeah.
You're not entitled to not suffer.
Yeah. And
okay, go on.
In this instance, very drastic, very like on a big scale, of course. So when I say this, it's not to minimize what's going on at all. But what I'm saying is that when we look at suffering and we look at our role in engaging with suffering, for one, I find that we have to have a more of an appropriate view of what that is. But two, it helps us. I feel like if we have a better view of suffering, we could actually help people better. In the sense that if you feel like you're owed everything, that means that you don't feel like you're probably owing anybody else, right? If you feel like you're entitled to something, it doesn't mean that you're entitled to do it, just because of just the nature of that entire entitlement and ownership that you think that you should have, the right that you think you should have. I think that when we see and experience suffering in other people's lives, and that even on a big scale, I think it is moving. I think it does hurt people deeply, seeing that, just because that's not how it should be. It is how it is because that's the world that we're in, but that's not how it should be. And so we have something in us that's like, this isn't right,
Yes. And let me quote a verse, because it talks about, in the Bible, talks about eternity is in our heart. And I think part of what that is referring to is deep within the soul of every human being, even a human being that doesn't believe in God, an atheist, an agnostic. The deep within their soul, though, that we're actually speaking from our biblical worldview, there was eternity put in their heart, like it says in the Bible, which means they know this isn't right.
Yeah.
Like, why is it that we cry at funerals and we go, this isn't right? Because all humans have ever known is death. Like, I'm not getting out of this world life. You're not getting out of this world life. We've been at funerals before. We're going to be at funerals again. But why is it that we're always shocked by it? Because, and this is your point, deep within our souls, we know this is not the way it's supposed to be. Yeah. The kind of suffering we're seeing.
Yeah.
But suffering is part of every human So go on.
And I think on a big scale like this is where I'm going to have a hot take. I think on a big scale from this, either people are being a silent party about it or they're being very vocal. But I think across the board, I think it's fair for me to say the majority of people will look at the instance when it comes to these hurricanes and seeing our response to it not being adequate at all. Because when you see suffrage or suffering in another human at a small scale, on a micro scale, it's easy for us to be like, I could step into this. But when you look at something at a big scale, this is where we usually look at systems and places to be like, okay, what do we have here to actually like tackle this? Like, we have phenomenal stories that we could read about people entering this space and lending help to, their communities and everything. And I think that's wonderful. But we have a situation when we this is where I think we got to, like, this, the hope for the Christian is putting their hope and faith in God, and we walk by faith until that faith becomes a reality, right? We see that faith come to fruition in in real time. And this is why I don't think I think everybody that puts their faith and hope in a government is not setting themselves up right or well, just because one, to give the government grace, it's full of people, and people are just like you and I. We're all flawed, and we're not perfect,
never gonna be done
and there's a
perfectly.
lot of stuff there too. But when we look at the government and we look and be like, hey, you need to step into this, and if we don't agree with how they do it or the lack of what they're doing, and it brings frustration and anger, I think like that, and you just really live by like that being the ruling factor of your life. Like government's here, and this is you, and you look up to the government for all the problems to be solved. You're always going to be disappointed. You're always going to be disappointed. And I think that when you have hope in God and you see the way that He's able to work in this, as disastrous as it is, we're seeing also we don't want to be blind to all the goodness. And this is something that you do really good. And I've been practicing this for myself. You do a really good job, Pat, of constantly reminding people of like, well, let's not forget and let's not turn a blind eye to all the good that's actually going into this space. And we often get lost in how ugly something is, but there's so much beauty in people entering and helping and providing resources and getting involved. And so whether that be on a huge scale or a micro scale, like that's, you know.
Yeah, great point. One of my favorite quotes that I used to give a lot years ago when I was working in the anti-human trafficking field, and I can't remember the author of this, but he said, part of the malady of our culture is this tragic rationale that if I can't do everything, I can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we see the enormity of like human trafficking or see the enormity of like these hurricanes or a natural disaster like that, and we're not talking about a handful of people, we're talking about hundreds or thousands, we go, well, what can I do? So we become paralyzed and inert. We don't do anything. But I think that our call, I know that our call as human beings and as followers of God is to do something. Like, don't get overwhelmed with it. Yeah, you can't do everything, but you can do something. So figure out what you can do. And it's not going to save the world, but it'll be the world to the person that you're doing that for. Again, great reminders on we're living in a world, we saw it this year in 2024, where suffering is part of being human. And what we need to do as human beings is do as much as we can in our power to alleviate that suffering and to fight against those injustices. So conflict in Israel in the Middle East.
It just keeps getting worse.
Yeah. Let's go into that one. Hey, we hope you've enjoyed this episode so far. Be sure to like and subscribe to not miss a future podcast. Okay, let's get back to the episode. Something that actually blew up a lot there, no pun intended. It blew up a lot there, and it really did. And it's always been the Middle East of the entire world. That is where, which shouldn't surprise us again from a biblical worldview, because it goes way back to the first book in the Bible in Genesis and what happened there. 4,000 plus years later, we're dealing with the repercussions of that. But what I don't want people to miss, and this is what's so amazing, we live in one of the most exciting times in all of human history. Like, think about it, Brandon. Since 586 BC, so over 2,500 years ago, Israel was not a free nation. They did not, because when Nebuchadnezzar comes in 586 BC and destroys Jerusalem and drags them off into captivity, even when they come back, when the Jewish people come back, they were still under Greek rule and then Roman rule, and then they were kicked out of their country. Not until 1947. So from 586 BC until 1947, the Jewish people did not have a state or a country. And now they do. And it's new since 1947. And if you looked on a map, you would see this little tiny speck called Israel. And then you'd see this massive surrounding of countries that are their enemies, that have publicly said, we want to wipe them off the face of this planet. Now, some of our listeners may be going, what does that have to do with us? It's on the other side of the world. And my comment would be, it has everything to do with us. Because again, all you have to do is go back to the beginning of the story and realize that what happens over there is going to affect, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually will affect every corner of this planet. So it's very, very important for us to pay attention.
Yeah. And I think whatever your take is on that conflict, whether you're anti or pro, whatever it is, I think it's very important for us, just even as Americans, to understand in that region how important Israel is just strategically.
Yes.
So like not even just like a believer, but even just as an American on a strategic level of how important this conflict actually is. Like you want to play this out, right? Logically to the illogical extent of it, it does not look good without Israel in that region. And so, no, I agree 100% with you. I think it's a lot of things can be frightening with that. I think that a lot of people either just turn a blind eye or a deaf ear to it. I think everybody ought to be more invested in it as far as just even looking into what's going on. I think it's very important that, like we mentioned like yesterday too, like it doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree with everything or disagree with everything either.
Absolutely.
This is a 2,000, 4,000 year geographical issue that's been going on way before we've been on this planet.
Yep.
Even like the last 100 years, this has gone far longer than that.
Yep.
And so there is a lot of mess here.
Yep.
And I feel like let's have some grace when we approach this conversation. So.
And to go about what we said on the other issues, it's not to live in fear, though.
Yeah.
God doesn't want us to live in fear. Like there's a lot of things that we can't control on what's going over there, obviously. But I do think it's something that our audience should be paying attention to because it's going to going back thousands of years. It's really, really messy. And we're living in a very exciting time in history where I think we're actually seeing prophecies being fulfilled or in the process of being fulfilled that were given thousands of years ago. It's crazy, crazy to see. Yeah. And I'm just going to give my opinion on this really quickly. But people that are theologians that are maybe listening, I think the other reason this is important is I don't buy into what they call replacement theology. And most people listening would be like, I've never even heard of that term. Replacement theology believes that when Israel rejected God, that God rejected Israel, and the church then replaced the promises that God gave Israel. So in Genesis 12 and 15, when God takes Abraham and he promises the land and he gives actually the boundaries, open your Bibles and read Genesis 12 and 15. You'll see the boundaries. They've never had that. Even in David and Solomon, they never had, when they had the most land that they ever had, they never had all that God said he was going to promise them. Well, there are many today that would say like, well, that doesn't matter anymore because God rejected them and the church age now, he's going to give it to the church, the Gentiles and the Jews that are believers. I don't actually believe that. I don't think that's good theology. So that goes back to the promises that God gave Israel way back to Abraham in Genesis 12 and 15 have not been fulfilled yet. And I think we're looking at a time in history where we're like, oh, could it happen in our time? Like, could it happen in our lifetime? I get excited. So don't live in fear with it. Dig into it, study it a little bit, and you should be excited by what you're seeing over there. But also it goes back to the compassion too, recognizing there is an enormous amount of human suffering that is taking place over in that part of the world that we need to pay attention to. AI.
Yes. A little lighter.
Yeah, a little lighter, but man, another thing that's just bringing a lot of fear to people. Yeah. And
I don't think it should.
Why?
It's only going to bring fear to people that are already just fearful already, and it's most likely just because, and this is gonna be a little bit more blunt, so receive it as well as you can. It's gonna harm the people the most that aren't bringing enough value to their life and to the marketplace. This is a very exciting, and I'm telling you, like you can even be a low-skilled person, but if you're using AI to the extent of somebody that might be super skilled but not using AI, this is an even playing field now. It's really cool. Like we see the internet boom. This is the next internet boom. Like this is huge. This is the one thing that potentially could take down Google. Yeah. Like no one thought that would be possible. This is a thing that we're going to go now. We're not going to be, it's insane how powerful this is.
Yeah. Google became a verb for us.
Yeah.
Because go Google that. But we're already starting to see where people are starting to go, I don't Google things anymore. Yeah, I go to ChatGPT or whatever AI unit that you use, but it's changing, and it's going to change the workforce. It's going to change, but you're saying we don't need to fear that.
I don't think so. I think there's bigger, like on the macro level, there's a lot of things like we could, of course, false prophecy of like, oh shoot, what happens if they get smart? And
what happens?
I've seen Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah. That's why whenever I use AI, I talk very politely to it. You're like, it'll give me an answer. I'll say, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you
remember
please, remember me when you come back as robots and start taking over the world.
Mr. ChatGPT, sir. Yeah, so I think there's like that macro, of course, but as far on the micro, at least focusing on the now, the thing is like AI is not going anywhere. And people that think it's like, oh, it's not like that great.
It's a fad.
It's a
gonna
fad.
Go right. Yeah.
Like you're missing the internet, you're missing the Google boom, you're missing Facebook boom, like you're missing all of it. You're the same person that said all this stuff. And I think that with AI specifically, it's one of those things that will get, of course, smarter and smarter and smarter. It's like that kind of technology that's going to be different hugely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is one thing I think that's scarier for people is because people initially thought AI would be replacing jobs like the blue collar jobs, the lower skilled jobs, but we're finding that it's actually flipped. It's the people that are actually higher level skilled. We're seeing it affecting people that are doing copy. We're seeing people that are doing like editing. We're seeing people that are even like coaching, like fitness, everything across the board. Like imagine if you're able to feed an AI software all your data on the last 10 years of all your sales recordings of all your salespeople, and you're able to put it into the AI and it's able to learn everything, and you make it so AI can now get on a sales call with somebody and it sounds like a real person. And now it knows how to filter through everything based off the prompts that the person's giving to them and the responses to know exactly the best way to sell to this person, this individual. We see, like, just play this out logically. Like, you can now you can get rid of the sales force, right? Now, this is where people are like, what, Brandon, you said you shouldn't be afraid of. I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to weave back to here, right?
Yeah. All our salespeople are getting in car wrecks right now.
Yeah. But I think even on the medical side of things, I love doctors, I love nurses, I love the medical field, but at the same time, I do think that the medical field is very highly dependent, not on individual knowledge, but on technology. And AI has the capacity. Imagine now you are somebody in AI. If you're able to have a wearable tracker or something, and you're able to get all these different kind of metrics on your health and give it to AI, and now it's able to spit out and be like, oh, these are all the markers and the metrics that we're going to follow to be able to help pinpoint what's actually wrong with you.
The most advanced technology from all over the world all at once.
Yep.
Yeah.
You can see this in therapy. You can see this everywhere. Now, I think why we should...
Okay, now tell me why not to be afraid, because you just eliminated a third of the jobs in the world.
Yeah. I don't think you should be afraid because because again, it's one of those things, it's not going anywhere. So it's a question of, are you going to use it or not? And if you're going to use it or not, is it then the question, are you going to suck at using it or not?
Yeah.
And the people that are able to utilize it the best are going to be just fine.
Yeah.
I've heard this, I can't remember where I heard it from. Often not people bet on the jockey, not the horse. And this is one of those situations in which you want to bet on the jockey, not the horse. The individual that knows how to use AI and leverage it and
that's a great
take advantage of it.
That's a great illustration.
Like it's going to hurt people in that workforce, but it's either going to have to up their game, or in addition, another thing, if you feel like you're somebody that's not getting like the edge, if you're somebody that feels low skilled, whatever that might be, AI is making it even now.
Yeah, it's evening
you could be the best person.
Leveling the playing field,
you could be the best person in your field, but if you're not using it, give it some time. Somebody that doesn't have a degree but knows how to use AI properly.
Yeah.
Come on.
So our point really with this is one of the current events that we saw in 2024 was AI really exploding on the scene. And what we're saying when it comes to the power and complexity of human choices, that we make our choices and eventually our choices make us. Don't fear this. It's here. It's going to be used for bad and it's going to be used for good, like every other technology that humans have ever come up with. But what you're suggesting is what we can do is you figure out how to leverage it, because it's not going away.
Nope.
And I say the same thing. It's a tool that's here and it's an amazing tool. Figure out how to leverage it, do your homework on it, research it, try to figure out how to do it safely. Because again, you start putting a bunch of stuff out there and it's out there. So you want to research a little bit on which I don't know what you would call which AI software or AI individual you're using, program, whatever. I'm already calling it an individual, like it's a real person.
Yeah, we
That's
can
around the next
we
corner.
can be fearful of AI a little later down the road.
When
things start changing a little bit.
Yeah.
Like when the robots get into our house, like that Elon's working on.
Yeah.
Then maybe we could be like, okay.
It's crazy. I just saw that the other day.
I've seen this Will Smith movie before. I know what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, until then.
But I can again, because I'm a couple of decades ahead of you and some of our listeners, and I can promise you, I've watched this in my lifetime. There were things that were coming out. When the internet was coming out, there was absolute fear. where people were saying it's going to take away a third of the jobs, and then they started listing all the jobs, and people that were in school for those jobs are really nervous about it. And here we are. And it became an incredible tool. It's been used for bad. It's been used for good, but it was a tool. And I think AI is the same one. It's probably the most technologically advanced tool that humans have ever come up with, that we know of, I guess. But it's not something to fear. Figure out how to leverage it.
It's going to be more fearful for those that aren't going to use it.
We just have a few more minutes, and so let's land on one more that's not controversial at all, gender issues.
Oh.
So go ahead and take that one, Brandon.
I don't know how to approach this one, actually. I'm a little bit confused. Sometimes I have this opinion. Sometimes the next day I go to this one.
Let me take this before you end up getting in trouble. As we're wrapping up this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment on something you'll take away. All right, let's hop back into the remainder of the episode. No, I do think that we don't want to ignore this one.
Yeah.
Because, again, it is one of the things that we're dealing with. And if you don't think we're dealing with it now, you project out 5 or 10 years and we're really going to be dealing with it, because we're living in a society now that, not going to let my 4 or 5-year-old decide what they're going to have for dinner, but we're letting them decide what kind of sexual identity they want to have. And so what we're going to have is even more confusion down the road. But even with speaking again, John 1:14 says that when Jesus came, he was full of grace and truth, which is beautiful. How do you have grace and how do you have truth? Because most of us as humans, when we start speaking truth, we do it with just a total lack of grace, and people don't feel loved or valued. Somehow Jesus blended those both, which we need to try to do. So with this issue, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I do want to just throw this out there, that there will always be confusion with your identity as long as we think it's based on what's between our ears or what's between our legs. Now I'm going to pause for a little bit and let that sink in for our listeners. As long as your identity is based on what's between your ears, what you think and believe, or what's between your legs, there's going to be confusion. And we're not just talking about gender issues. Almost all of our problems as human beings comes back to identity issues. I had a counselor, a psychologist that came up to me after I had given a message years ago about identity. And he said, Pat, almost everybody that I have in my office, the core of what they're dealing with is identity issues, whether it be gender or whatever. But then again, so what is it? If we can't trust what's between our ears or between our legs on gender issues or identity issues, what do we trust? Well, as people that believe in a biblical worldview, we have to trust what our Creator says about us. Anything else is going to confuse you. So we don't just have to go to the gender issue here. We can actually go to, I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I've failed in the past on this. I'm going to fail again in the future. If those are things between your ears that you're believing about your identity, go back and see what God has to say about you, and it will radically change.
Yeah.
So anything to add to that without getting us into too much trouble?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think identity and your self-image, I think, is no matter what, the key thing that we're always going to struggle about. That is the thing that we're going to, like talking about the biblical worldview, the first temptation of in the garden was about identity. The temptations to Jesus after he got baptized was about identity. It all has to do, like the game plan here is all the same thing. It all has to do with identity. And I like to view this similar to how Maxwell Maltz put it, but I'm going to completely butcher it. But he says something on the lines of, a new self-image is not a transformation of identity. It's not discovering something new about you. It's not something that changes. Like who you are, your mental picture of, like, all that changes is your mental picture of yourself. But who you are, your identity, your actual true quote unquote self has always been and will always be what it is. And what we do isn't a transformation of our identity. It's more of a realization of what our identity is. And we live in such a murky, messy world, and it could be highly influenced by politics. It could be hyper-focused on social issues, whatever it might be. All these things can be very, very confusing, especially when we start introducing this to, like how you mentioned, children, for instance. Like, it gets very, very messy. Like, I thought I was a dinosaur when I was 5.
Yeah.
I ate like one and roared like one.
Yes.
And
yes.
my parents were like,
Thankfully, you had
Good
someone
job.
that was telling you you're not.
But yeah,
you
no,
can go
but
ahead and
I was not a
pretend.
dinosaur.
Yeah.
I was not a dinosaur. But I think though, like we are, when I say that, I'm not saying that to like make some like
Yes.
judgment or to make fun
Yeah,
or poke anything. What I'm saying though is that when we're looking at kids specifically, I fall in the line of we're Americans. We live in this country of freedom. If you want to view yourself in a certain way, you can, but be an adult. When we talk about children now, this is where my hot take is. We better be very, very careful
Yeah.
when we step into that
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
Because when we look back at what's going on right now, however this goes, if we look back on this, how things are going on right now, we want to ask ourselves, how is the future going to look at this history and be able to look through this and be able to decipher of like what's going on with this culturally in society, like on a social level. I'm under the belief that, especially, of course, we're coming from more of a faith-based viewpoint, biblical viewpoint here, is God created you to be like him and to be fruitful and have dominion of all these things. But God made you in his image. And so when we talk about identity and we talk about our purpose, whatever that might be, our identity and our purpose is to first know God and to be known by God. That's it. Like when God created everything, he didn't create us to be like, hey, I want you to do like, yes, be fruitful and do these things, but it wasn't be like, I want you to become a CEO of your business. I don't want you to be confused about your gender or anything like this. God, all he cared about was walk with me and be in my presence.
Yep.
That was it.
Yep.
And when we look at it this way in the biblical worldview is if we can identify in what God tells us, then it gets very, very much more simple from there on out. Like there's,
for sure.
The guy wrote a book, guys.
Yeah. A long book.
A long book.
Yes.
A very, very long book.
Spans 1,500 years.
And so when we get confused about this, and no matter what, again, to touch on your point really quickly before we wrap up, is we could take this in any direction, right? We could talk about this the way that you view yourself as far as if you are to self-defecate on yourself as far as the way that you appear and the way you look and the way that you feel and are you worthy of something? Does anybody actually love you or care about you? Like we can get into all these things, right? We can go like in any kind of direction. So no matter what, the big issue is always going to come down to our self-image, our mental picture of that we have with ourselves. The goal here is to unblur that self-image, and this is where we can, we'll have to cut this off because we'll be able to talk probably hours on this. But this is the reality of what's going on and then the perception of reality of what's going on. And so we have these quote unquote mini truths based off perception, but we do have an absolute truth of reality. And what we do is we interpret through emotion, through imagination, through stories, and we end up living by those truths. And when we live by those truths,
some of those stories aren't true.
Right? Most of them are lies.
Yeah. Or things that you've been telling yourself.
Half-truths,
or subconscious thoughts.
Yeah. And they could be true to some extent.
They could be, and they may not be.
Yeah.
But yep.
And what happens, though, is when we adopt these truths, these stories to be true to ourselves, we live up to those expectations of that reality and that truth. So we get this constant feedback loop of this is how I identify, this is my behaviors and actions, personality traits, and habits are going to, of course, reflect that and not just reflect that, but actually be revealed by my identity. But then those reinforce that identity. So it's this cycle right here. And that's so hard to break because that is a truth in which that you view yourself. But that doesn't mean that is the actual reality of what happened to you or the reality of who you are at all. And so we got to make sure that we juggle this. And
that takes it full circle. We can land the plane with this, but it's well said, Brandon, because again, it goes back to as long as we base our identity with what's between our legs or what's between our ears, what we believe, the stories we've told, the stories we've heard, the truths or the lies that we subconsciously have believed, we're going to be confused. And it isn't just about the gender issue. We can talk about all kinds of other identity issues. So how do we know what truth is? You got to go back to the Creator, the author of life, and see what he says. I have things that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to unravel, lies that I've believed about myself, that God is going to slowly unpack and reveal to me the truth of my identity, of who I am in God and created by God. That's where we find the truth and the hope. So I guess as we wrap this up, we're leaving 2024. We talked about some of these huge events that have happened in 2024. A lot of them are things that could bring fear. Yeah. But you don't have to live in fear. We can navigate life. We're not supposed to live in fear. We can navigate life with truth and grace and hope as well, because we know who's still on the throne.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed the conversation recap on this past year and that it left you with inner peace as we navigate what's to come. As always, thanks for your support. Be sure to stay tuned for our next and final episode of the year. See you next time.